Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our first webinar on the strategic suppliers to government. This is an annual report which we put out, and for the first time, we are running a customer-only webinar. It's so we can take you through the key findings, as well as how you can use the Tussell platform to delve deeper into your follow-up questions. My name is Hollie Hodgson. I am the Head of Account Management here at Tussell. And for those that haven't met me before, please do connect with me on LinkedIn afterwards. This webinar has 3 sections. First of all, an introduction to Tussell and the strategic suppliers. Next, we'll be going through the key findings of the 2023 iteration of this report. And then the final section, we will go through how you can use Tussell to delve into your follow-up questions. We'll save 5 to 10 minutes at the end in order to answer any questions. And rest assured, while I can see your name and your company, others on the call can't. All questions will be anonymous, so don't worry about revealing any trade secrets. Speak freely. For any questions we don't get to, we'll follow up directly after the webinar. So, while all of you guys are customers, we do have a mixed bag of users and non-users on this call. I never like to make assumptions, so as a result, here's a quick reminder of what Tussell is. We are the referenced source of UK market intelligence purely for the public sector. We are trusted by some of the largest suppliers to government, as well as the government itself. Suppliers are using us to make a data-driven approach to how they sell to the public sector, while the government uses us in order to drive procurement efficiencies, both centrally and locally. We also like to see ourselves as synonymous with the public sector, so don't forget, if you ever hear of us during your daily public sector Horizon news scanning, if you see us, please do reach out to your account manager for the underlying data. You're a customer, you're entitled to. And as you can see from this page, we are trusted by over half of the strategic suppliers for their sales enablement. And at its core, what Tussell does is we take open data and we make it useful. That way you can spend less time cleaning up government data and more time actioning it. So enough about Tussell, let's crack on with what you're really here for, the strategic suppliers. A quick introduction. What is a strategic supplier? There's 39 of them. Some are household names, but others are relatively unknown to the public. They provide critical services, from ambulance services to building schools, running our emergency services program, to cleaning all of our buildings. They are essential for the delivery of most public sector services. While annual revenue exceeding 100 million is a practical criteria, detailed in the strategic suppliers risk policy, which we've linked at the bottom, it's not a requirement. A supplier can make the list by simply being deemed significant in their sector. But with greater power comes greater scrutiny. Not only does the Cabinet Office take a hands-on approach to managing these strategic suppliers, it can definitely be a blessing and a curse. The strategic suppliers' revenue is often deemed at risk due to calls for supplier diversity and social value. And here is a quick visual representation of which Crown representatives manage which strategic suppliers. This page does not include the representatives for the sectors, so those managing local government, SMEs, projects and VCSEs. Sadly, they could not fit on this page. While there are some clear commonalities with how the strategic suppliers have been divided, others it's unclear. The key takeaway I want any strategic supplier on this call to take is know your peers and know your rep. Do you know what good looks like, both from your relationship and on the other side? What are their priorities for the year ahead? Some really basic things that you need to understand. And since our last iteration of the report back in 2022, we've had one new entrant to the list and we've had 2 rebrands. Interserve FM has been acquired by Mighty. Tilbury Douglas has entered the list, related to the fact that Interserve's construction arm had been rebranded. Motorola lost the emergency services network and has since come off the list. NG rebranded as Equans. Atkins, F&G, and SNC Lavian have rebranded as one Atkins Relius. And we've grouped this cohort into different sectors, including aerospace defense, construction and engineering, consulting, technology, telecommunications, and outsourcing and FM. This will help you with identifying themes and wider trends across the sector. If you view these sectors differently, and you may feel very strongly about that, you may wish to create your own cohort in Tussell afterwards. The report that we send out will include links for the cohorts. That way, when you're tweaking your analysis, it will be a lot quicker. Next, the key findings of the 2023 edition of the Strategic Suppliers, including the main takeaways. The size and scale of the UK public sector procurement landscape is huge, £222 billion in the 2022-2023 financial year, the last financial year reported in this report. This is based on published expenditure, which the wider public sector publish and which Tussell collects, cleans and aggregates. Of this £222 billion, the strategic suppliers represented 9% of the market share in the last financial year. As you can see in the third bar, the formal implementation of Brexit and COVID saw a huge rise in outsourcing spending, a 26% increase versus the previous financial year. And rather than going back to pre-COVID levels, the public sector locked in those gains and continued to grow. This suggests that despite the political rhetoric, the era of big government is back. But despite the growth in outsourcing spending, the strategic suppliers haven't kept up. Their market share dropped for the first time to below 10%. While some may see this as a disappointment, the most prominent suppliers in the public sector being underutilised, others may view this as a success on government, reflecting the ambition for supply diversity and the need for new talent and innovative SMEs to solve big government problems. Here you're now starting to understand the blessing and the curse. But don't underestimate these suppliers. Despite their decline, their market share is still huge. This stat really helps to put it into context. So these 39 suppliers, including all their related subsidiaries, represent less than 1% of all public sector suppliers and 9% of all procurement expenditure in the last financial year. Conversely, in the same financial year, the wider public sector spent 24% of all of its monies with SMEs. Now, that does not include subcontractor cost, but it certainly helps to explain why the Cabinet Office takes such a hands-on approach to managing them, especially when considering central government's commitment to spend £1 in £3 with SMEs. These suppliers do and will play a core part in enabling the government to do this. Now, this page is now looking at the overall position of these strategic suppliers and how it changes over the last few financial years. There are some clear commonalities, but the market is surprisingly dynamic. The key takeaways here are 5 of the strategic suppliers breached the £1 billion threshold: Kier, Mighty, Balfour Beatty, BAE and Babcock. All earned over 100 million, but it's worth noting some of these values will be understated, most notably Microsoft, who get a lot of their procurement expenditure via partners and resellers. You can see this in contract awards, but this chart is based on direct expenditure, so we aren't able to map and marry up the data there. Most notably, only 11 of the cohort managed to grow. All other suppliers, either their earnings were flat or they declined. An important message or takeaway here would be, why? Why did Mott-Max earnings decline, but Atkins-Realius grew? Is Deloitte's decline of earnings reflective of the consulting market, or is it simply a loss of COVID earnings? How has Amy fallen to 6th place after being top of the ranking for 2 years running? Is it down to losing an important relationship, contract, or something else? Is it internal budget cuts? We'll run through how you can do this type of analysis in Tussell later on. Now, this page will help with identifying the overarching themes across the strategic suppliers, depending on the sectors that they operate in. So the aerospace and defence cohort is the only sector with clear growth. Again, your question would be why? Is it the war in Ukraine? Is it new relationships won by Thales and BAE, the suppliers that are in this cohort? It's important to note that while tech is flat, it represents the most in terms of direct revenue. And actually, if you exclude Computer Centre, which lost its DFE COVID contract, which finished its course, tech actually grew by around 4%. The prominence of the tech market here also demonstrates the government's priority of transformation. Another question you might actually want to look into is did the gains in tech eat into previous spending by telco, which actually fell by 7%? Outsourcing and FM and the consulting cohort both see a sharp decline. Both of those were spurred by a reduction in spend following COVID rules ending. And if you would like to understand which suppliers across these different sectors grew, this is the best way to start analysing it. Here we can see the direct revenue mapped across the x-axis and the change in revenue versus the prior year on the y. The size of the bubble represents the distinct number of relationships. Some of these suppliers are standout. Take Thales, decent revenue, decent growth, but very small number of distinct relationships, especially compared to someone like BT. BT's revenue is higher, albeit less growth, but certainly more secure. Losing one customer will hurt Thales a lot more than it will hurt BT. The clear sector which is stand out is tech. Over half the growing suppliers are from the technology cohort. An important step for any Tussell user is to look at why. What is driving the growth in the tech market? Is it specific projects? For example, DDAP. Is it transformation or shortage of skills or a drive of cloud? Why is AWS growing versus Atos? Are there any common themes which you can identify? Something that we'll walk through in the next section. And now this chart is really about helping you to understand the priorities of the vertical that you're selling into, and you analyse it by row rather than column. So central government is driving tech spending. 44% of all of its spending with the strategic suppliers went to those in the tech cohort. In the case of the MOD, most of its spending from the strategic suppliers is down to its relationships with those in the construction and engineering cohort, as well as BAE and Thales, so those in defence. Conversely, the NHS is fairly diverse compared against other verticals. There is a clear route for nearly all the types of cohorts for the strategic suppliers. Consultants represent a small percentage across all verticals. While this makes sense considering the service offering, it may also explain why major consulting firms are investing more in tech, or suppliers like PA Consulting being acquired by suppliers like Jacobs. Blue light is the most reliant on telecommunications. All other verticals have less than 10% of its total strategic supplier spending with this cohort. And unsurprisingly, for transport, the main driver is construction engineering firms. But a good next step for those on the call is to review which suppliers in this cohort are driving this trend. So who's the most embedded telco supplier in blue light? So we're now flipping this to look at the individual buyers of the strategic suppliers, namely the top 20. The key stats here are these buyers hold some serious purchasing power. They represent 74% of all direct expenditure with the strategic suppliers in the last financial year. On average, 28% of the top 20's total procurement spending was with this cohort. MOD tops the list with £3.3 billion, but HM Treasury is also standout. While its spending is much lower than the MOD, the spending with the strategic suppliers represents 80% of its total procurement expenditure. A final note worth mentioning, this predates the bankruptcy notice by Birmingham City Council, who has since gone into administration and did make the top 20. This chart helps show how hard the reduction of spending could hit certain strategic suppliers. So we're now looking outside of the strategic suppliers to look at the challenges. We don't often do future predictions here at Tussell. We love to let the data speak for itself and bring along storytellers like myself to help point to people what matters. But we do have a certain talent for picking strategic suppliers. Several past challenges that we've identified have made it to the list. Computer Centre and Leidos were both identified as challenges before entering the list in 2020 and 2021. A majority stake in PA Consulting, who was identified as a challenger in 2021, was recently acquired by Jacobs, a current strategic supplier. So again, what is the message here? For viewers on the call, if you're selling to the public sector, are you only monitoring competitors of your peer group, or are you looking elsewhere? Well, the message to the public sector is, are you looking at other major players when procuring critical services that you'd usually defer to the strategic suppliers for? Are you also proactively engaging with them about things such as social value and other hot topics in procurement? Effectively the same conversations that you're fielding to the strategic supply cohort. And it's worth mentioning for those looking at CBRE who made it because of their FM offering, some of their revenue does include some pass-through costs, so things like rent and service charge, which comes from its real estate side. It's just worth caveating here. And on this page, like the similar chart, we have mapped out the challenger's revenue against the strategic suppliers to help contextualize their growth versus their earnings. Like the previous chart, you can see direct revenue on the X and you can see the change on the Y. The next step for any Tussell user, find your nearest challenger based on the earnings and the sector they operate in, and ask yourself, why did that revenue grow? What projects and services and customers is this supplier selling to that you guys aren't? Is it all about diversity of customer, or is it down to the service offering? All of these can be done as a next step in the Tussell platform. And now we are flipping to routes to market. So back in 2021, Tussell became the first market intelligence provider to match call-offs to the frameworks by which they originated from, providing fresh insight into which frameworks are really being used by the public sector. Our data shows that they're becoming more popular as an alternative to open competition, and the strategic suppliers exemplify that trend. In the last financial year, nearly 40% of all of the contracts won by the strategic suppliers were matched to a framework or DPS, a whopping 28% higher than in the 2019-2020 financial year. So as we can see, use of call-offs of COVID was a big driver. The public sector had a shortage of time and an influx in demand. So while we did see a drop in value in the latest financial year, it certainly has not returned to pre-COVID levels. It's also worth noting 63% of the £17 billion in contracts that the strategic suppliers won in the last financial year weren't matched to a framework. So this indicates that they were competitively tendered. And it really emphasizes the importance of pre-engagement ahead of the tender process to make sure that you're not being locked out of these opportunities. And the clear so what on this page is, are you clear on what frameworks matter to your sector? Do you understand how they work as routes, so direct awards versus further competition? And if you're interested on what frameworks are most important to the cohort, this page really demonstrates it. And what we can see is that reliance on frameworks actually varies considerably based on the cohort. So use of frameworks is most prominent in tech, and it is the least important in aerospace and defense. On average, each of the strategic suppliers won call-offs from at least 10 distinct frameworks. And here it is very clear that some routes to market are more versatile than others. Interestingly, G-Cloud features in every single one of the cohorts. This helps to show its adaptability. While Technology Services, another CCS framework, features in 5 out of 6 of the sectors. And a final key point, the most valuable call-offs in the last financial year were in either the outsourcing and FM cohort or the technology sector. And don't forget, a huge benefit to selling to the public sector is that you can make use of published renewal dates in order to get ahead of the tender process. As of the end of October 2023, the strategic suppliers had exposure to 1,600 live services contracts. In total, these are worth £13 billion, and they're coming up for retender between Jan 2024 and December 2025. So we are specifically looking at services contracts, which are much more likely to be re-procured, as opposed to things like works projects, which naturally come to an end. Targeting these contract expiries is a data-driven way that you can fill your pipeline with real sales opportunities, ensuring that you're effectively challenging or partnering or avoiding the strategic suppliers in the most effective way. One message of this chart is clear. The strategic suppliers are most exposed in central government. This vertical represents 60% of the value of expiries that these suppliers have in the last, rolling off in the next couple of years. So we've now come to an end of the key summary of the 2023 edition. The next section is all about how you can use Tussell in order to delve deeper and start researching your follow-up questions. We've put together a few examples, specifically 5, but by all means, this is not an exhaustive list. There are many ways that you can start interrogating this data, and I do recommend booking some time with your account manager to explore these further. So the first exercise that you may want to do is building a pipeline of strategic supplier renewals. For this, I've decided to pick IBM, a large technology supplier, and again, drill into those where there is a clear service element. You could build a rolling pipeline, or you could pick your desired period. In this case, I've gone ahead and picked. You may want to focus on the most valuable opportunity, for example, that DDAT, data services contract for the Home Office. You may want to build it out by its an account plan. And if you're a smaller supplier, look at those by volume versus value. Or it may also just be important for you to start identifying the top quarters to prepare for. Most importantly, when you find an opportunity, for example this with the Environment Agency, coming up for retender in January 2025, and it was a previous tech services call-off. Do you have relevant key stakeholders to engage with? Are you speaking with, let's say, the director for digital and IT? Are you also making sure that you're comparing, well, how much was that contract previously worth versus what's being spent? And are you looking at IBM's weight in across all of its subsidiaries? And if you're looking at an individual entity, such as the Environment Agency, are you also looking at how embedded it is? with the central government body. All of these will help paint a picture of how embedded the supplier is and how you would go and challenge them. You may also want to do some deep dives into how these suppliers are successful in the public sector. You can do this using Tussell's unique frameworks data. For this exercise, I'm looking at Amazon Web Services as opposed to all of Amazon. And here we can see quite a stark picture. The vast majority of AWS's contracts are matched to preferred supplier arrangements, with G-Cloud being by far the top. We can also see the trends there. That is growing more over time, with G-Cloud 13 now topping the list due to a large opportunity AWS recently won with the Home Office. You may actually wish to look outside of that framework, or outside of that supplier rather, and look at the G-Cloud 13 framework. What can Tussell tell you already? What does AWS's market share represent on this framework? Who's the top by value versus volume? Or perhaps looking into use of G-Cloud. Is it being used more over time or less? If you aren't a strategic supplier, but you frequently work with them, you may want to use our platform in order to find partnership opportunities. To do this, you need to build a picture of where that supplier is operating. In this case, we're having a look at British Telecom's, BT, and we can very quickly, using the Tussell platform, look at who is spending money in local government. Feel free to divide it by things like region, in, let's say, the last year. Here we've quickly identified around £90 million in direct earnings. And here is a very clear list of which individuals matter most. If you wanted to drill into a certain area, such as London, you can easily do so. And once you've built out your picture, the next step could also be to look for some relevant renewals, perhaps really large ones where BT might need some more support. This will help you with understanding the best way to support the supplier and ensure that when they go up and make their case for an extension, you're doing it in the best way possible. And as you can see, if you're looking at this and saying, well, actually, I only support in the case of BT's WAN opportunities, you can also further tweak the data. So here we're now starting to look at the growth versus the decline of a certain strategic supplier. And in this case, we picked Deloitte, who we did notice earlier had a sharp decrease following COVID. So first of all, we're looking at how its earnings have changed over time. So if you compare 2021 and 2022, the top buyers beneath, it's very clear the loss of the gains it made in Department for Health and Social Care had a really big hit on its revenue. We can also start looking at this based on the verticals. So here we might map, well, is it central? Is it local? How is it making up the additional lost earnings there? Another way to look at this is to drill down actually into some of the contracts which were due to expire last year. So here we can have a look at, first of all, the previous calendar year, how exposed was Deloitte to some of those. We might want to actually drill a little bit further. So we could say, let's take a step back and look at perhaps the last 2 years. What major renewals did it lose here? Particularly perhaps of Department for Health and Social Care, which we identified earlier had a big influence. And if you go even further, here you can start identifying the real contracts which drove that. So here we can see for the national testing programme, when those came to their natural end of their course, that did have an impact on Deloitte's earnings. And in this case, we're going to look at the impact of PA Consulting's acquisition by Jacobs. You may want to understand what new relationships that they'll be able to uncover. So who, for example, has paid PA Consulting directly in the last couple of years? If you're an employee of Jacobs, you may be thinking, well, how can we use those pre-existing relationships in order to double down on perhaps our existing relationship with MOD, or perhaps even ever worked with Hampshire Council, and this could be a way in. You may also want to analyse some of the upcoming renewals that PA Consulting holds, which ultimately Jacobs will need to take over of all of the live contracts. So those were 5 different ways that you might want to be using the Tussell platform to delve a bit deeper. Like I said, absolutely not an exhaustive list. Do feel free to reach out to your account manager afterwards in order to test out different ways and ascertain what next. And so what we're going to next go through is some of the key priorities which anyone on this call should be aware of. So first of all, if your takeaway from this webinar is that you are going to start competing with one of the strategic suppliers in the cohort, this is effectively how you need to be doing it. So you need to monitor the upcoming renewals and start engaging at least 6 months ahead of the retender process. As mentioned previously, a huge benefit to selling to the public sector is that actually you're able to make use of those renewal dates. And as a Tussell customer, you actually have 20% more renewal dates than open data. It's a nice little data processing that we do. It's also important to conduct spend analysis, paint a picture of where they're doing business and you aren't. Identify which routes to market that they're winning from that perhaps you're not on, or that you're second guessing because you've not been successful in these. And of course, make use of our key decision maker data to start building relationships with both green space and white space accounts. So areas where you're already working versus areas you've yet to break into. Or perhaps a key takeaway is we're never going to compete with them, but we would like to partner with these suppliers. If you want to do this, strategic suppliers, they need to increase their social value in their bids. So if you're an SME or you're a local supplier to that area of the contract, position yourself as a partner. That will only help the strategic supplier's success. Again, make sure that you're conducting a spend analysis. See which strategic supplier is the right partner based on their current direct earnings with the authority or vertical you are trying to grow into. Browse the upcoming renewals to identify opportunities where your services would help the incumbent supplier to win the renewal. And in the same vein, find routes to market which are being used to procure the products and services which you sell, and then sell to the suppliers on that framework or DPS, rather than trying to get on all of them yourself, which can be a very time-consuming and expensive process. Or a final way, your takeaway may be you want to avoid them altogether. If so, find specialist areas that the strategic suppliers are not active in. These 39 suppliers cannot do everything, and focus your attention there. Sell direct to the key decision makers to win lower value opportunities, where the strategic suppliers are less likely to be interested. Or if you're an SME or regional firm, focus on the local authorities where you're likely to have a better social value proposition. This will help with, again, streamlining the number of bids that you need to go and ultimately improving your success rate. And in the year ahead, don't forget about the upcoming changes in public procurement. Start preparing. There are going to be new notice types being brought in, with the goal of giving more visibility of procurement stages. There is a move from meat to mat, and while the public sector has never said buy cheapest, it can certainly feel that way. This change should make less of a focus on price and more about delivery. A single supplier registry, good news for all, that's all I can say. There is a lot of time invested getting those registrations across different portals. This is a massive win for the suppliers that are trying to sell to the public sector. And don't forget, a debarment list is about to come in the next year. Make sure that you're clear on the rules for exclusion and what that might mean in your process for going to market. There are also going to be more procedure types with the goal of simplifying public procurement. Make sure you're clear on them. Make sure your sales team, your bids team, they know how you can work with authorities. And a new platform is ready to go live in October 2024. We at Tussell are ready. Make sure you guys are. And I recommend you check out some follow-up resources afterwards in order to help with your planning. We've put together a guidebook on the Procurement Act. We also have our series of Titans reports. I've thrown up a couple of them here. So the Tech Titans and the FM, which we saw had huge drivers of growth, as well as making sure that you're really clear on how you guys can actually win more work under frameworks. And you're also clear on the different routes to market that you can take. Those were both webinars that we did last year. So that's all, folks. Thank you for joining me today. I would love to hear your feedback, so please do drop me a message on LinkedIn. And if you have any questions, a reminder, you can post these in the chat, or you can contact me directly via email or LinkedIn, and we'll get back to you. We will also send over a recording of the webinar and the slides, so you can share this around with the wider team. Have a lovely day.